Hey there, Judge James again, here to talk a little more about Fantasy Age, because it's a lot of what I'm doing gaming wise right now. And because of that, I thought I could take a few more minutes here and chat with you all, especially since a few folks had some really cool comments last week, both on Twitter and in on Discord, and then in some private messages that they enjoyed the content. So why not? I can talk about games too. Lots of folks do that kind of stuff, right? And I have good lighting in this room, and some folks said my lighting was good too. And I that's the sun, I guess, or maybe just the sun that day. I don't think today's lighting's quite as good. A little more forehead shine possibly. But anyway, last week I talked about all the reasons that I really love the Fantasy Age system, and I can't do that every time I do a video. But if I have something to talk about, I can talk about something, right? If I have a specific topic, and I thought I would talk about character options because I shared a image on Twitter today of what character options I'm going for in my session 0 tonight. Because tonight is the first session, the session 0, the pre-session for character design in my Crystal Loon JRPG game. So I wanted a cool title for it. I have been calling it Tavern Tale. I ran it as Tavern Tale last year. I ran it with the kiddos, and I wanted to like grow it up a little bit. So over the weekend, I was like furiously writing, and I turned like a 17-page, just basic, you know, sheet of bullet points into nearly 50 pages. It's actually over 50 pages now because I added an appendix Nintendo. That's my version of appendix N. Of like source material for people that want to like get into the groove for my setting. But one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was ensuring my players tonight during the session 0 have an idea of what options I went with, because I got the main book, I got the companion, what options I went with for character creation. Because while as the basic rulebook can take you start to finish with how you're building your character, there are some options the GM has to select and tell the players that they are selecting for the players to build their characters, right? So I thought I'd go through each of the options I went with and then why I went with them, just in case any of you are looking at starting a Fantasy Age campaign and want to choose what to let your players go with. And these are by no means my preferred options. I think that the one cool thing with Fantasy Age is you could run a Fantasy Age very much like more old school D&D style game with everything random, and the players have no idea what they're starting with at the beginning of the game, kind of like Dungeon Crawl Classics. Or you can go for the high heroic fantasy, like for my game, for my Crystal Loon campaign, the high JRPG inspired, Final Fantasy, over the top action. That's what I'm going for, and I think Fantasy Age is going to do a good job running that as well. So the books I'm playing with here, we got the basic rulebook, and the companion, and this is where everything's coming out of. Although I have dipped into quite a bit of the campaign builder's guide just to review this before I started working on the setting. A few other books here to talk about too, but we'll hold those for a second. So first off, when you are session 0 in general, if you don't know what a session 0 is, you've probably been under a rock for a while. But essentially, I'm gathering my players together tonight to talk about what they're going to build character-wise. So there's some cohesion to the group, and that they don't show up with 3 identical mages and 2 warriors that have no desire to adventure. I want to make sure that in this campaign the player characters know each other. I don't want to have it be they all walk into a tavern cliche. There is a time and a place for a cliche. This isn't it. I wouldn't mind some of that fun, like Japanese, like RPG, like console based, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest. Some cliche JRPG themes, like one player has amnesia, one player character wakes up in a bed in his parents' house to go adventuring, a la Chrono Trigger. That would be really cool. But I don't want to. I don't want to influence them too much. Like one of the players is not a big JRPG fan or hasn't played much beyond like the original Dragon Quest. So with that in mind, I feel like I want to have there be some some guidance towards what the characters kind of should look like in the game. So first off, basic fantasy rulebook. You have the Fantasy Age basic rulebook. You have to make sure you tell your players how they are making their characters' abilities and how they're generating them, because the default is rolling 3d6 in order down the line of all of the stats, the attributes. And this is very much like other RPGs, and then you get to switch 2 of the stats. So that's like, sort of like how you would start the game is you would go in that direction. And I want it so you have accuracy, communication, constitution, dexterity, fighting, intelligence, perception, strength, and willpower. Those are the 9 stats. So you'd have your character roll 3d6 in order, and it generates, the 3d6 result isn't what goes into the stat. It is the modifier, which is page 10 of the rulebook, that goes in. So if you roll an 8, the starting ability is 0. If you roll a 14, the starting ability is 2. And it's not quite like D&D. It doesn't match up the same way. So it's not going to be like the old school D&D where a 13 to 15 is a +1 and a 16, 17 is a +2. Doesn't work that way. It's not like 3rd edition either. All right, so you have to treat it a little bit differently. Just use the determining abilities chart. Again, I don't have anything to share. Just hold it like that. There it is. Look at that. Good chart. Good graph, right? Use that. If you've played Dragon Age, you might notice some of the stats are a little different, because there is some difference between Dragon Age and Fantasy Age. Dragon Age predates Fantasy Age, and there's a magic stat, for instance, and there's some differences in how the stats, what they modify, especially in combat. But we're playing Fantasy Age, so we're going to stick with Fantasy Age. There are other options, though, for building characters, and I'm going with that. I'm going with option 2, which is buying abilities. It's point buy. So each character gets a pool of points. All right, so every character is going to get 10 points, and then can spread them out any way they want. However, and each stat starts at 0. You can't have less than 0, because in the rolling system, if you roll a 5 or less, you can have -1 or -2 to that stat. In the point buy, you can't go less than 0, but you also can't raise any stats to a 4, which means if that whole joy of getting the 18 on your 3d6 in order isn't going to be there, which is okay. 3 is pretty darn good. Remember, you're just adding your attribute bonus to your 3d6 roll. I mentioned last week a little bit about how the mechanics for Fantasy Age work. If you want to have a detailed breakdown, other people do this job a lot better than I do. In fact, I would say me discussing character options right now, I am sure there are other YouTubers that are doing this better than I am going to do it today. But I have a channel and a mouth, so I'm gonna keep going. So I'm going to use point buy for the players tonight, and then the other aspect I'm using is that there are the 2 books, and each book has a series of they're older. They're still using the term character race, but they have races in them. All right. I know that I try to use ancestry or as much as possible. I know 2021. The great thing about our hobby is it's expanding, becoming more inclusive and whatnot. So I hope it's something that Fantasy Age changes when they redo the rules or revise the rules coming up. But the book does use the term race, and we have dwarves, we have elves, we have gnomes, we have halflings, we have humans, and orcs in the basic fantasy. I keep saying that. I keep wanting to say because there's a basic rule book for Fantasy Age. There is a game called Basic Fantasy RPG. This ain't it. So if I've said it a few times, I apologize. All right. Companion for Fantasy Age brings a few more races. They bring the Beast Folk, which are, it's like Frog from Chrono Trigger. The blooded or half-blooded, blooded characters are those that have some part of the monster in them. Orien are like constructs, living constructs, like Robo from Chrono Trigger. There's a lot of Chrono Trigger feel in here, I think. Drac are your dragon people, your lizard people, and there's also some notes believe it's actually in the Fantasy Age Basic Rulebook for mixed heritage characters. You're half orc and you're half elf if you want to try pulling that together. So what I'm allowing in the game is any one of the character races from either of these books is fine. You know, you can take any ancestry you want and go with that. With one exception, is the only mixed heritage character I'm allowing is something called a Nodra, Gnodraa. And that is a gnome drac hybrid. And there's a story reason to that, because last year in my campaign, when I ran it as Tavern Tale, I one of the player characters wanted to play a gnome dragon hybrid who was very tech savvy, and they were from a tribe of gnomes who had a wish to become dragon-like, and it was kind of a cool idea. And the fact that in my setting world, this dragon queen, she was also she's the sky god. She has this air crystal that gives her godlike powers. That the sky god, created all of the drac in my world. So she's like, yeah, gnomes, you guys are pretty cool. Boom, you guys are all like gnome-sized drac. So we only use in my campaign the mixed heritage ancestry for gnome drac. Everything else isn't in there. So as there's been other dialogue on this topic, the whole idea of the mixed heritage can be kind of there's so many, it doesn't fit this world except in this one very specific instance. I probably wouldn't even use it unless another player had a really good idea for it, and Maggie, who was in our game last year, had a great idea for it. So that's in there. What I'm not doing, and classes, yes. So you're going to have your warriors, your mages, and your rogues, which is the same whether it's Dragon Age or Fantasy Age. Some things I'm not using source material wise. So try to use everything out of these two books. It should all be in here. I'm not pulling anything from Dragon Age. I might pull monsters from Dragon Age as the GM, but I'm not pulling any talents or abilities or character options from here for a couple reasons. The first is I don't think the players need another source for this. We're not playing Dragon Age. I do want to play Dragon Age still. I still haven't played Dragon Age, but I own everything for Dragon Age. I love the Dragon Age video games, but that's not happening right now. So this book, we're not using any of these, besides the fact a lot of the talents and magic already is ported over and exists in Fantasy Age. So that's not needed. The other thing is we're not using the Expanse. Or I should say Blue Rose or Titan's Grave or Modern Age. So, really, I don't want characters dipping into other books and say, oh, yeah, I like this, I like this, I like that. However, I think that there's some reason why I should be allowed to use the ace specialization because I want to be a gnome, airship fighter pilot. That actually sounds kind of cool. But we're not going to do it. I'm not breaking any rules. I'm not breaking my own rules. I'm going to run the Expanse sometime here in the near future too, and we get to experience all of that. They got to stick to the two main books, and that's fine. The next thing is backgrounds. So one of the things when you're building your character in Fantasy Age is that you're going to, after you've selected your ancestry and whatnot, you're going to go ahead and roll a background and roll or pick, and you roll a d6. And you can get outsider, lower class, middle class, or upper class. And your backgrounds are going to then filter you into what kind of, that role is going to filter you into the actual background themselves. If you roll outsider, you're going to roll again and can get, criminal, exile, hermit, pirate, radical, or wanderer. Once you've kind of worked your way down the list of backgrounds, you get to choose a focus that is like a skill focus. So let's say, for instance, you rolled a 1 on your background on the first d6, you roll again, you roll a 4, your background is pirate. You started your life as a pirate, and you can choose. You can have the focus for dexterity sailing or strength intimidation. Focuses, or foci, or foci, however you want to pronounce it, that gives you an extra +2 to your roll. So if your dexterity is a 3, and you have the dexterity sailing focus, that means you're going to add +5 to your 3d6 when you're making your roll to do that skill test. this is a fine, list of occupations, but actually the companion adds quite a few. So my one rule that my creating player characters option I'm putting in for tonight is that when players roll backgrounds, they have to use the backgrounds listed on page 12 to 19 of the Fantasy Age companion, and this adds a few more backgrounds. It adds arcane, noble, outlander, religious, commoner, criminal, guild, and military. So this expands the groupings and gives a lot more options, for what players can choose. And I think that that I want to keep this being a random roll. Although I could be convinced if a player really hates what they roll, if they have an idea that they want to have this character with a background who the character grew up as a wizard or whatnot, and or worked as an apprentice, and they end up rolling minor, I don't mean minor where they were a kid, which wouldn't make any sense. That's not in here. But miner, then if the player really doesn't want to work into how that fits, that's fine if they re-roll it. I don't care. That's okay. So that's allowed. I'm allowing that in here. I also am adding the minor arcana option listed on page 53 of the companion. And what this does is it gives cantrips to mages. So mages only have a handful of spells. They have 4 spells to start with at first level. And if you think about in games like Dungeons and Dragons, or OSR games that are based on Dungeons and Dragons, having only 1 or 2 spells at first level is typical. But in high fantasy games, you might want to have a bit more magic. So what this rule does is it lets characters, essentially perform one of like a whole series of minor arcana cantrips. So arcane candle, a tiny point of light. They can create arcane servant, a small servant that can move small objects, things like that. Mage's flint, they can create a small fire with a snap of the fingers. Pretty cool stuff, but it just kind of adds it's all flavor addition. Although a savvy character with Mage's flint could be very useful for a party if that character has that spell and they need to set a fire like now. So I'm going to be using that option as well. One thing I was thinking about was when I was designing the campaign was the role of gods and deities in my world. And in my Crystal Loon JRPG inspired Fantasy Age campaign that I'm writing, there are these 5 gods that wander the world and own and control domains. And each one based on a series of crystals, really going for that earth crystal, air crystal, water crystal, fire crystal, a light crystal, and a dark crystal. There's actually a missing deity in my world. The light deity is missing. No one knows what happened to them, and that crystal is missing too. Trying to add some interesting tidbits into the design of the setting. I thought for a while about whether or not those deities could bestow magic. And I felt that does not seem, for most of the JRPGs I've played, you have your white mage, your black mage, your blue mage, your red mage. You can tell I play a lot of Final Fantasy. That fits over there, but while you could say your white mage and a cleric are very similar, I decided just to go with the base rules out of the Fantasy Age basic rulebook, where there's only tie magic to clerics. It's all there's mages can cast spells. The companion does give an option in here to allow players to have a divine connection to their spell casting, and I'm not using that option. So even though there are gods in my game and gods and goddesses in my game, there is no option for divine magic. The last thing I want to bring up is action points, and I was really struggling with this. I wanted to add one more component to gameplay besides the stunt system. I really like having there be a in-game currency option for players for rerolls. It's one of my favorite things from games like Numenera and The Strange and the Cypher system, as well as from Savage Worlds with bennies. And while it's not in the base Fantasy Age rulebook, there is on page 116 and 117 of the companion a system for for, action points. And every session, the character gets 2 action points to start, and then use them on a whole litany of things. Rerolling any die, including damage rolls. So I read that as any die roll, and that means, does that mean a single die? And I think I'm going to make it just be a single die. I'm not going to have it be the whole dice roll. It's a single die roll. I don't know. My players might argue with me on that. Reroll the stunt die, keeping the highest result for determining stunt points generated. Immediately heal the character if they had time to take a breather, healing 5 plus constitution plus level and health. Regain magic points. Add a detail to the story, things like that. Take additional action, spend 1 action point, allows an additional minor action, while 2 allow an additional major action. All right, there's a couple more in there as well. I was thinking about this long and hard. That you're supposed to get 2 action points at first level, and then every 4th level get an additional one. And that may work, and it's for a session. That may work for some campaigns. But we're going to play this game on Wednesday nights. And I know from experience playing Savage Worlds in a shortened 2.5 hour to 3 hour time span that it's really easy for players just to be rocking those bennies or XP pretty quickly, especially if you gift them to your players during the game, and the system does kind of call for that. So my modifier is that I'm breaking it down to it's 1 action point per session instead of 2, and you don't get that 2nd action point until 8th level, and you don't get a 3rd action point until 16th level. So if any of my players are watching right now, I'm sure they're groaning. Sorry. It's too bad. Maybe I'll change that as time goes on, but I really feel like kind of restricting that a little bit on the front end isn't too bad. The characters will get pretty heroic at some point, and they have the stunt system. I think the stunt system already gives a pretty high-flying action movie feel to the Fantasy Age game. I don't think it needs to have the stunt points, but I appreciate the game for having it, because every once in a while, a player's going to have really bad luck, and they're going to want to reroll. And, this will help them. So those are the options I'm using. I'm going to wrap it up here. The other thing I almost used the churn system from the Expanse, but I'm not gonna. I'm going to keep that in the Expanse for right now, and maybe I'll do another video after I run the Expanse to talk about the churn system. But for right now, I think we're good. We're left for 20 minutes here recording. I'm sure I'll have better things to do than watch me rant with my bad hair and oversized Disney shirt here on YouTube. So if you are running Fantasy Age or Dragon Age or The Expanse or Blue Rose or anything like that, and you have selected certain options, would love to hear about them. Just throw them in the comments, or if you're seeing us on Twitter, go ahead and respond back on Twitter. I'd like to hear what you're using and how it's worked for you. Again, I have run 2 campaigns already for Fantasy Age, but they've been at lower level. We haven't gotten past 10 sessions. So I'm really excited to see how this works out. So fingers crossed for session 0 for me. This is always the game I'm the most nervous for, because this is the players choosing who they're going to be. And since I plan on writing all of the adventures for this campaign, I'll be using everything I've put in this campaign. I'm trying to write myself. I'm doing the maps myself with Incarnate. I'm trying to make this be something that's mine, because I spent so much time running published materials. So it's going to really, come down to who these player characters are. So a little nervous. So, all right, that's it. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.